The ongoing conflict involving Iran powerfully reminds the world that war is not a garland of flowers but a bed of thorns, a painful truth that history has repeated countless times. At the beginning of every war, leaders often speak in the language of honor, strength, and victory. They promise quick success, national pride, and security for their people. On television screens and social media, military power is sometimes portrayed almost like a spectacle, missiles launching into the night sky, fighter jets roaring across the horizon, and commanders speaking confidently about strategy. Yet behind these dramatic images lies a far darker reality. War quickly transforms from political rhetoric into human tragedy. Cities that once echoed with the laughter of children become filled with the sounds of sirens and explosions. Families that once gathered peacefully around dinner tables suddenly find themselves running toward shelters or mourning loved ones who never returned home. In the context of the current tensions and military confrontations involving Iran, this painful reality becomes even clearer. Modern warfare does not remain limited to soldiers on a distant battlefield. Missiles, drones, cyber attacks, and economic blockades affect entire populations. Civilians often suffer the most because they are trapped in the middle of political and military struggles they never chose. Hospitals struggle with wounded victims, electricity and water supplies become unreliable, and schools close as fear spreads through communities. Parents worry not only about the safety of their children but also about their future in a region overshadowed by uncertainty and instability. For the soldiers themselves, war is far from the heroic adventure that propaganda sometimes suggests. A soldier enters battle carrying not only weapons but also fear, responsibility, and the heavy burden of survival. On the battlefield there are no flowers or celebrations, only the constant threat of death, exhaustion, and trauma. Even those who survive often return home with psychological scars that remain long after the fighting ends. Veterans frequently struggle with memories of violence, the loss of comrades, and the moral weight of what they witnessed during the conflict. Furthermore, the destructive effects of war spread far beyond the immediate battlefield. Economic activity slows down, trade routes become dangerous, and entire industries collapse under the pressure of instability. Ordinary citizens who once lived normal lives suddenly face unemployment, inflation, and shortages of essential goods. Markets react nervously to conflict, and global economic systems begin to feel the ripple effects. Thus, the phrase, "war is not a garland of flowers but a bed of thorns," perfectly captures the truth that war brings suffering not only to those who fight but to entire societies. It replaces hope with fear, prosperity with destruction, and stability with chaos. In the shadow of the Iran conflict, the world once again witnesses how quickly political disputes can transform into painful human realities. The saying, "war is not a garland of flowers but a bed of thorns," becomes especially meaningful when we examine the deeper consequences of modern conflicts such as the ongoing tensions involving Iran. Wars rarely remain limited to military confrontation, they quickly evolve into complex crises that affect every aspect of human life. Political leaders may enter conflict believing that military strength will secure their national interests, yet the outcomes of war are rarely simple or predictable. Instead of quick victories, wars often create prolonged instability, economic hardship, and widespread human suffering. The battlefield may appear far away, but the pain of war reaches into the homes, workplaces, and daily routines of millions of ordinary people. One of the most immediate consequences of war is the disruption of economic stability. When conflict erupts, governments divert enormous financial resources toward military operations. Funds that could have supported education, healthcare, infrastructure, or social development are suddenly redirected toward weapons, logistics, and defense systems. In the context of tensions involving Iran, a country located in a region that plays a crucial role in global energy supply, any escalation can shake the international economy. Oil markets become volatile, transportation routes face security risks, and investors lose confidence in regional stability. These economic shocks spread beyond the borders of the countries directly involved in the conflict, affecting businesses and consumers across the world. At the same time, ordinary citizens bear the hidden costs of war. Inflation rises as supply chains are disrupted, food prices increase, and basic necessities become more expensive. Workers lose jobs as industries slow down or close entirely due to uncertainty and damage to infrastructure. Families that once lived comfortably may suddenly struggle to meet their daily needs. The psychological burden of war also weighs heavily on societies. Fear becomes a constant presence, as people worry about potential attacks, political retaliation, or the possibility that the conflict may escalate into a wider regional war. In addition, modern warfare brings new forms of suffering through technology. Drone strikes, cyber warfare, and long-range missile systems mean that destruction can occur without warning and far from traditional battle lines. Entire neighborhoods may be damaged in moments, and communication networks may collapse under cyber attacks. In such circumstances, civilians become unwilling participants in conflicts that they neither started nor supported. Thus, the metaphor of the bed of thorns becomes painfully accurate. Every decision made in war carries painful consequences: loss of life, destruction of infrastructure, social division, and economic decline. What may begin as a political confrontation eventually transforms into a humanitarian crisis that leaves deep scars on societies. The situation surrounding Iran reminds the global community that war rarely solves the problems that created it. Instead, it multiplies them, leaving behind generations who must rebuild their lives amid the ruins of conflict. Ultimately, the conflict surrounding Iran highlights a deeper philosophical truth about warfare: war rarely produces clear winners, but it almost always produces lasting suffering. The statement that war is not a garland of flowers but a bed of thorns reminds us that beneath every claim of victory lies a trail of human pain and national exhaustion. Throughout history, wars have often been justified in the name of security, justice, or national pride. Leaders argue that military force is necessary to defend sovereignty or prevent greater threats. However, the outcomes of war frequently prove far more complicated than the ambitions that started them. Even when one side claims military success, the social, economic, and psychological damage inflicted by war continues to haunt nations for decades. The tensions involving Iran demonstrate how modern conflicts can rapidly expand beyond their original causes. Regional alliances, geopolitical rivalries, and strategic interests pull multiple countries into the same crisis. A single military strike can trigger retaliation, and retaliation can escalate into a cycle of violence that becomes increasingly difficult to control. In such situations, diplomacy becomes fragile while emotions such as fear, anger, and nationalism dominate public discourse. The danger is that political leaders may become trapped in a logic of escalation, where backing down appears as weakness and continuing the conflict seems like the only option. Yet history repeatedly shows that prolonged wars drain the strength of all parties involved. Military campaigns consume vast economic resources, weaken national infrastructure, and divert attention from pressing domestic issues such as poverty, healthcare, and education. Soldiers return from the battlefield carrying physical injuries and psychological trauma that affect not only themselves but also their families and communities. Meanwhile, civilians who have experienced displacement, destruction of homes, and loss of loved ones struggle to rebuild their lives in societies that have been deeply fractured by conflict. Another tragic aspect of war is the generational impact it leaves behind. Children who grow up during times of violence often experience interrupted education, emotional trauma, and limited opportunities for the future. These conditions can create cycles of instability that continue long after the weapons fall silent. Communities must spend years, or even decades, rebuilding trust, infrastructure, and economic stability. In many cases, the scars of war remain visible in ruined cities, divided societies, and memories that cannot easily be erased. Therefore, the metaphor of the bed of thorns carries an important lesson for humanity. It warns that war may promise glory, power, or quick solutions, but in reality it brings suffering that touches every layer of society. The situation involving Iran serves as another reminder that diplomacy, dialogue, and mutual understanding are far more valuable than military confrontation. True strength lies not in demonstrating the power to destroy, but in finding the wisdom to prevent destruction. Only when nations recognize this truth can the world hope to escape the painful cycle of war and move toward a future defined by peace and cooperation rather than conflict.